So aloha and welcome to the Graduate Student Hacks panel. My name is Kristen Connors, and I'm the Fellowship Scholarships and Professional Development Coordinator in Graduate Division. I'll be moderating today's session. Today's panel is co-sponsored by Graduate Student Organization. Joining us on the panel are members from GSO's Executive Council. The panelists will be discussing how they approach challenges in the areas of balancing priorities, developing professional relationships, and graduate research. They'll also be reviewing your posts on the Padlet throughout the panel for further discussion. Now, let's turn to our guests and get to know them. Hannah, would you like to introduce yourself first?
So my name's Hannah. I serve as the GSO parliamentarian, and I think I've done that for about 3 years now. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in the Department of Philosophy, but I'm also almost done with the Advanced Certificate in Women's Studies, and I have a background in philosophy and creative writing.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much, Hannah. Next, Maya, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, sorry, my video may go on and off depending on my internet connection because we live in the virtual world now. I'm Maya Ward. I am a fifth-year PhD student in the economics department, and I serve currently as treasurer for GSO. Previously, I served as vice president, and I think this is my third year in GSO as well, if I'm counting correctly.
Excellent. So we have some veterans here. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we may have a third panelist join us. And if he is able to attend, we'll go ahead and have him introduce himself at that time. So thank you so much, Hannah and Maya, for joining us today. What we'd now like to do is have everyone click on the link for the Padlet. So again, let me just go ahead and drop that into the chat box. If you did not already click on it, go ahead and open that up so you can see what the discussions are on our topic. And we're going to begin today's panel on the first topic of balancing priorities as a graduate student. So Hannah, would you like to start things off by sharing what challenges you've encountered in this area and how have you been addressing those challenges?
Absolutely. So I have some notes here. So I think that for me, one of the biggest challenges, aside from all of them that I've encountered, is just balancing who I am as a person and an activist and a scholar. And that's presented itself as a challenge for me because of things like imposter syndrome, because I'm a first-year college student, and I'm almost a doctor now. So I really went from having parents that had gone to high school to almost being a doctor within one generation. And imposter syndrome is rough for everybody, but I think that as soon as you start tacking on statistical barriers with things like that, it gives you more avenues by which to experience imposter syndrome. And it's hard to find one's own community when you're kind of simultaneously in and out of many communities. So, if my activism is conflicting with my personal relationships, and if my scholarship is then conflicting with my activism, and the way that I have not figured out, but the way that I am dealing with that on a day-to-day basis, because I'm trying not to say that I'm going to solve it, because that's, I think, an issue of the human condition, is the kinds of relationships that we have with each other. And I don't think that those are things, at least for me, it's not helpful to think of them as things that can be solved. But something that has really helped me cope with being a human being on an existential level is to work on just boundaries between those different parts of who I am. So, am I interested in this as an academic or as an activist or as a person? And then what does it look like for those different kinds of roles to interact with each other? So within my own research, I study a lot of ethics. I study a lot of social and political philosophy. I study a lot of critical race theory and women's gender and sexuality studies. And, as those are very human-centric things. So it's just an issue of approaching it, is this reading upsetting me because I'm a woman and this is misogynistic, or is this upsetting to me because it's bad argumentation? So, and I think that is, I encountered that originally as a barrier because obviously, I thought as a 22-year-old woman, oh, well, I don't get this because I'm not smart enough. And it's like, no, nobody gets this. And that's why people are writing about it. So it's important to kind of stay grounded and just understand like where the challenge actually is, rather than taking it all into myself and saying, you know, this is my fault that I can't do this. Like, is it my fault or am I doing something that's difficult? And I think that that might be something that other people might relate to, especially if you're doing something in like the humanities, is something as situated as political theory. So that's the long and short of my answer to that question. Thanks.
Yeah, Hannah, I think you make a couple of really great points, which is that just kind of that open-mindedness of, you know, what perspective are you looking at this challenge from? And then again, as you mentioned, it's not necessarily about finding a solution sometimes, right? It's just how do you want to approach this? How do you want to deal with this particular challenge at this time? Maya, what's some of the challenges you've encountered with balancing priorities as a graduate student?
Yeah, I first just want to echo Hannah, what you just said about, you know, am I not smart enough, or like, is this just hard? Excellent point. I need that too. So what I was focusing on is like my work versus school relationship, because I know me, like a lot of graduate students, you know, you may have either a work study or a graduate assistantship or a teaching assistantship, and how do you balance fulfilling all those hours with like your actual degree program things? And then I also am long-term relationship. I got married during COVID. So, and my partner moved here with me. So from Washington, D.C. So it's big changes, but I feel like these things can also apply to any long-term relationship, whether it is romantic or friendly or platonic, familial, anything. So with balancing work and school, just and really for all of these things, I feel like it's important to tell everyone that you are not alone. The people who seem like they have everything together, people tell me I seem like I have everything together all the time. You know, we're just better at hiding things. But you know, everybody struggles, especially with these last couple of years with challenges. One thing I found that helps me is I've started scheduling work time like a class. Because I've had a couple different positions where one of them was actually it was a government contract, so you had to very carefully keep track of all your hours, and so that one was easier to fit in because like I had to just keep track. I had an office to go to. But right now, my current assistantship is much more flexible, and so it's good and bad. And so I created a schedule, and I have like, this is my work time, you know, these 2 hours, and since I don't have to obsess about the exact hours, you know, I don't worry as much about like, okay, am I reaching exactly 20 every week? Because that's sort of an average. For me, something that also helps is finding a place separate to work that's not, I live in a small apartment. This may be, if you live in an apartment complex, you may have an amenity deck, or, you know, there may be like a rec room you can go to. There could be empty classrooms on campus. I've done that recently. And, you know, if a class comes in, you just say, oh, sorry, I stayed late, and then walk out and find something else. Or there's always the library as well. I'm coming up on time, but quickly about long-term relationships, clear communication and frequent communication is very key.
I see that Logan has joined us, so maybe while Maya's reconnecting, Logan, thank you for being a part of our panel today. We're talking on the first subject of balancing priorities, but before you dive in to sharing about your experience with that, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so sorry about my tardiness. Um, so I am currently a master's student in the tropical medicine department, and I also serve as the grants and awards chair for graduate student organization. So I have a lot of things on my plate, and I'm very well involved at the university. Outside of university studies and schooling, I also serve as a part-time athletic trainer at a local high school. And that's just so I can keep current on my clinical practice and also just integrate myself in the community. So I have a lot of various things that I juggle.
Yes, balancing priorities definitely sounds like a topic you can discuss. So what's an area that you want to share about challenges you encounter with balancing priorities as a graduate student?
Absolutely. So as a graduate student, you have to take into consideration being strong in your academic classes while also moving forward on your research topics. You're coordinating a lot with your mentors, maybe collaborators that you're working with. So you just have to take into consideration all of the various things that are going on and make sure that you don't drop any balls because everyone expects your best. So it can be kind of challenging to continue to do that.
Yeah, I think each of you really addressed some very diverse aspects of the topic when it comes to balancing priorities. So, it kind of shows the broad scope of what's involved with the challenges that grad students are facing. Why don't we take a look at the Padlet and see what students are saying and what are some of the areas that they're encountering challenges in? Hannah, is there something that you're seeing on the Padlet under balancing priorities that really speaks to you?
Yes, and specifically, and I'm sure that everyone else on this panel is more qualified than me to talk about this, but balancing, finding out like a good exercise routine as an academic is absolutely a challenge. And I think for me, like the biggest, I'm not going to give anybody advice. I'm not qualified for that. But I think weighing in on my own experience as somebody who was an athlete and then ended up being like 5'3" and then figured out like their athletic career was over unless they wanted to be the basketball that everybody like shot into the hoops. I had to like walk away from that very early. But just figuring out what an appropriate amount of exercise is for me, and then really listening to the people who sometimes when people say everybody could use more exercise, it's people like The Rock. And it's like, well, yes, but I am not a bodybuilder, and I think that just separating myself from and just kind of rooting into the fact that like there's an appropriate amount of exercise for everybody, and we all ought to be able to move around and take joy in that. But if we don't have time for that every single day, then find something that does work for us rather than like putting all this pressure to like go on a run every single day. Because if you just don't like running and you're just not going to exercise, then you're going to feel guilty about not exercising when you could have just taken up yoga and liked that more anyway. So I think it can be like an open conversation about figuring out what kind of movement works for you rather than thinking of it as like another thing you have to deal with, if that makes sense.
Exactly. Maya, by the way, Maya sent me a message. She's having trouble with her video still. So I think her audio works, but it's just her video. So Maya, is there something that you're seeing on the Padlet that stands out to you that you'd like to address?
Yeah, I think what stood out to me was sort of this making time for yourself. And like with what Hannah was saying, for me, I do exercise for my mental health. Of course, yes, I happen to like running, but not everybody does. But even just getting outside, walking around the block, sometimes that's my win for the day. And that's great. But I think, and when my internet stopped working with long-term relationships with this I was going to say carving out time each week for that and having intentional time versus a quantity of time. But I think that also really applies for making time for yourself and mental health as well, is that, you know, carve out time each week to do things that you like. I used my tuition waiver to the fullest extent by taking classes that I don't have to, that are just fun. So for me, I like learning languages, so I take some of those. I also am taking a ballet class this semester, you know, so you can use that there, or like there's the Honolulu Museum of Art has classes, you know, if there's different activities. It doesn't, for me, I keep talking about classes because for myself, that's how I actually do things, is if it's scheduled in a class. You know, if I do an exercise class or a movement class, not everybody is like that. So like Hannah said, figure out what works for you and what will motivate you and get you to do those things consistently. And, you know, even if it's once a week, but just getting getting together either with people or doing things that bring you joy. Just to say one last thing, my brother's friend has this thing about doing 30 minutes of joyful movement every day. So just 30 minutes of something that just makes you happy every day.
So if I could add on to that.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's just segue. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So in reference to balancing priorities, i.e. school, work life, family, exercise seems to be a rather large topic, as does social life. I found if you combine the two, that's really helpful. I make it a point to go to the gym with my friends, and that just gives us the space to work out and exercise, and also you have the social interaction. So two birds with one stone. If that's something that you want to integrate into your life, I think that could be a really helpful approach.
I love all these tips and feedback that I'm hearing. I mean, definitely two themes that are standing out are mindfulness and then intentionality, right? Creating purposeful spaces and time to try to fit in those different priorities. So thank you for those suggestions. Let's dive into our second topic of developing professional and peer relationships. Logan, what's been a challenge in this area that you've experienced, and how did you approach that challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am in a rather unique position where I have a co-mentorship. I'm in life sciences, and I have a clinical mentor who's a medical doctor, and then I have a laboratory mentor who's a PhD. And so the combination of these two mentors is kind of what fuels my research. So I have to balance two very different aspects, a bedside and bedside, together. And I found that the easiest way to develop these relationships is to be communicative. We're all people. There's always things going on in our life, and just being above and beyond in your communication. If you sense an issue or you're having difficulty vocalizing that and asking for help is really important, because no one reads minds, and that's especially true in graduate school. There's so much going on all the time that if you are not communicating, you can fall behind or feel like you're failing in that way. So that's how I've addressed that.
Very, very good point, Logan. Thank you. Hannah, what's a challenge you've experienced when it comes to developing peer or professional relationships?
I think again, for me, it's with boundaries between what makes for a good professional relationship and then what makes for a good personal relationship, because within the field of philosophy, it's very personal for a lot of people. And I mean, people have come to fisticuffs and like really taken it outside to the parking lot over very technical things. And I think that for me, it was a lot of figuring out, like reflecting on, you know, what I wanted out of certain relationships. And what I've really found that has helped me a lot is that I don't have to be interested in what somebody's doing to respect what it is that they're doing. But the thing that for me is never negotiable is respect. So I can be uninterested and I can disagree like thoroughly and fundamentally, but to never ever step into, intentionally, knowingly step into the realm of like disrespecting what it is that somebody else is doing. And unfortunately, I'm sure we've seen it all happen. And it's something that really stands in the way of developing like these really important relationships with people, because if you're not somebody that can be trusted to hear something they can disagree with charitably and honorably, then it's going to pose a problem, I think, later.
I think that's really interesting because I think for some students, they're still looking for that guidance on how to be professional and what respect means. So that's a real interesting topic, Hannah. Thanks. Maya, what about you? What's a challenge you've encountered when it comes to developing relationships?
So I was focusing on like social peer relationships because, you know, as I mentioned, I moved from Washington, D.C., so 5,000 miles away, and I know a lot of people may have moved here from the mainland, and you have to start all over and make friends. And then during COVID, you know, it's hard to maintain those, or I feel it's been hard to maintain relationships because I don't just run into people, you know, in class or on campus or things like that. And what I found is I need to just plan a little bit more. So because I'm not just running into people, we can't just be like, oh, let's do this spontaneously. Then you have to set things up, and some things I've set up are study dates or just getting coffee with people. And what I found is others often say they feel just as isolated as I feel. So I remember I saw when I was looking at the Padlet earlier that somebody mentioned feeling socially awkward, like you forgot how to interact with live humans. Totally feel that. And I think it's, even though it's hard, because I know it's hard for me, just reaching out and being that first person to say like, hey, do you want to meet up for coffee? And, you know, if you're still in classes, discuss the homework. Or, you know, I'd love to just like actually see your face in person, or, you know, something like that. And there's also different events that your department may be doing, and also shameless plug, events for GSO. We're hoping to start doing some events in person as well. And, you know, finding those avenues and communities where you will be able to see real people. I know that for me, that's better than via Zoom, but of course there are also some events that have been really wonderful, just casual things where I just have chatted with, you know, new people via Zoom through a GSO event. And you know, I felt like then when I finally met them in person, you know, I already knew them. So yeah, I think it's very hard to be that one to do the first push, but it's like dating, like start with a low stakes thing like coffee and build up to the beach day, you know.
No, it's really interesting to hear of some of the suggestions that you've all offered, because both when it came to balancing priorities and developing relationships, you talked about a blending, right? So like Maya, for example, you talked about having coffee with a classmate and talking about, you know, something that was discussed in class, and then that's also developing the relationship at the same time as the academic, you know, part. And then Logan, same thing, right? You know, doing something physically active with friends, right? The social and the well-being. So yeah, so that's really great if you can kind of integrate everything. So let's take a look at the Padlet again. And under the developing professional and peer relationships, Logan, is there something that you'd like to speak to that you see on the Padlet?
Yeah, so I noticed that the first comment there was an inability to take advantage of CV boosting, volunteer opportunities, or gain work experience. And that's really difficult to do right now. We're in the era of online everything. And so attending conferences, making connections that you normally would have as part of your professional development is kind of lacking right now. And I think just to keep in mind that's something that's known, and you can still put yourself out there, even at like a lot of online conferences. I know that they're providing a lot of like social hours. I know that a lot of different organizations on campus are really big on providing online events that you can connect to your fellow peers through either mentorship or online events. And so I know that that can be difficult, but it is out there. And I would suggest going and looking, because that's something that I've run into. Is like I don't feel like I'm building the professional development that I want to. It just looks a little bit different in this current time period, and finding ways to adjust to that is really important.
Hannah, is there something that you want to address that you're seeing on the Padlet?
Absolutely. And to build off of what Logan just said, a huge realization I just had, probably 2 weeks ago, is realizing that the development of these kinds of skills is something that I am going to do for the rest of my life professionally. And this is not something that I need to tick off of a list in order to like throw a good dinner party later. Like this is something that's supposed to take a really, really, really long time. And this is part of our job, right? Like this is not like a thing that we need to just like do because it's the new year, it's resolution time, you know, like, and I also saw somebody, you know, that COVID is making it really, really difficult to create professional relationships. And something that somebody told me once that has really been helpful is to just try to stay patient and understand that those meaningful relationships will come, and it takes years. You know, it takes years to develop good professional relationships with people because it takes them a long time to get to know you too. And there's this term called, I think it's Sonder, where it's like when you remember that everybody else's life is as rich and full and complicated as yours. So if we're finding, you know, if we're kind of like, if we're doing the shame spiral inward to say like, I'm not making these relationships fast enough. Like, okay, well, you're one person in somebody else's life and they can have 10, 12 siblings that they have to deal with on top of everything else it is they're doing. And, you know, I just had a moment with one of my advisors on this canonical board that I have to do, where he and I just bonded over Lars Van Trier films. And it was really, really helpful because now I feel like I know him better, but it also took 4 years to get there. So if that is resonating with anybody else, just understand that, like, how long have you been friends with your best friend? How long, like, they're probably going to still keep surprising you if you've been friends with them for 25 years. So just, you know, locate it in history and understand that, like, it's always open. And this is always something that you're going to be working on.
Thank you. Maya, is there something that you'd like to speak to from the Padlet?
Yeah, I actually, it seems like we're each addressing the different comments stood out to us. For me, it was the last one that's currently on there, not receiving any mentorship from your PI. And, you know, that could be your PI or if your advisor was given to you, you know, and that is awkward and hard. And I want to acknowledge that situation. But you can also develop other relationships where you can get that learning that you need to do, you know, like what we were talking about earlier about learning how to be professional, learning how to respectfully interact with academic peers or whatever it may be, that, you know, maybe you just don't really click with your PI. Maybe there's a professor that you've had that you really, you know, it doesn't have to be that you're buddy friends with them, just that, like, you feel like you understand them and they understand you. So my advisor right now, I always feel that he's telling me things because he wants the best for me, and that he knows a lot of information, so that whatever he's sharing with me, it's to better whatever I'm doing. And I feel like he also understands what I'm good at and what I'm not. And for example, he suggested that my friend, who's one of his other advisees, that we work on a paper together, because to quote her, we need a little bit of each other. And it's turned out to be one of the best experiences, because she's like super focused, really good at details. I'm like very much more big picture storytelling, and so finding that other places, while still not burning the original bridge, because if they are your PI, you do still have to work with them. And if you're really having trouble with that, find a peer, or maybe in a counseling center, you could do a one-off appointment to just discuss this issue about how do I deal with people. I often go to my dad, who happens to be a social worker, to ask about, well, about people, what do I do? But you could ask a therapist, you could ask a friend. And at UH, there is a community of people that want you to succeed, even if you may feel that your very immediate circle may not care. There are others outside that do care.
Thank you. Thank you so much for addressing all the different aspects of the types of relationships you might be navigating as a grad student. Let's go ahead and discuss our last topic, which is graduate student research. Logan, when we were preparing for this panel, you had an interesting but not entirely uncommon challenge that you encountered. Could you share this with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as graduate students, there's this innate drive to succeed and to be correct. And I think that we all have intents and purposes when we set out on a research endeavor, no matter the field. And generally, we like our hypotheses to be correct. There's lots of literature or information that helps to inform us forming our hypotheses. And so we're just setting out to prove what we think we already know, right? But occasionally, and many times, this is just what happens, we run into unexpected results. And this has happened for my own personal thesis topic, where I was sure, based off of all previous evidence, that what I was going to find was X. And instead, what I found was negative X. And realizing what to do with that and how do I write this story, and also internalizing that is not necessarily a failure. It's just different, and it's part of the learning process. And that negative X might actually be something interesting as opposed to what I expected, positive X. And so I think as a graduate student, when you encounter unexpected results, taking a moment to step back out of your own personal pride and think big picture of like, okay, data is data. What do I do with this? Like, what is this story that I'm experiencing or finding, and how does this contribute to greater knowledge about whatever your topic is? And I think that this applies pretty well across disciplines. I don't just think this is like a biomedical life sciences problem. I don't know if my fellow panelists have experiences like that, but just taking a moment to step back and sit in, okay, this is the process of learning.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Logan. Maya, what's a challenge that you've encountered when it's come to your research?
Well, I want to just throw out there, being an econ in the social sciences, I also had this happen with a paper where I expected a result and got a null result, which can also be interesting, and that's when you go to the faculty in your department and you're like, So is this still viable? Like, is this still good? It looks like I'm freezing a little bit. Okay, so one big challenge I've been having is in the actual writing, the process of writing, that I procrastinate a lot. And writing out like the data and results can be very straightforward, but then I especially have trouble with organizing my thoughts for the intro and conclusion and things. One thing that has helped me is, again, I mentioned this earlier, finding a separate space, because right now I work at my coffee table in my living room, and like it's very distracting, so finding just work. Now we can actually go to coffee shops, or to campus and things like that. And then also what's really helped me with my procrastination, I also mentioned this before, is working with a partner. So since this most recent project, I'm working with my friend. She is on a little bit of a different timeline, so we have to get things done like sooner than maybe I have to, which like forces me to do things. And then using that momentum into my other projects. And again, scheduling it. For me, that's a big thing, is just scheduling it, but telling somebody that I have to do it so that I can be accountable. Even if that's just my husband and he doesn't really care if I wrote a page or not today, he doesn't really always know like exactly what I'm going to be doing. I'm just like, you don't have to remember this. You don't have to know anything I'm about to talk about. I just need to tell you this out loud so that it becomes real, and then I'm more likely to do it. And tying this all back together with the first things we were talking about, I also do this with exercising. Just like 2 days ago, I was like, oh, I'm not going to go to this exercise class. I'm going to do a run instead. And because I said that out loud, he, listens when I speak, which is always nice, and was like, oh, so you're going to go for your run this afternoon? And then reminded me in the middle of the day, oh, right, I did say I was going to do that. All right, better start planning to do it. So for me, that accountability, which if you're not running into people in your department all the time, can be harder. Finding somebody, finding a buddy, a friend, maybe it's somebody back home, you just call them up, say, hey mom, hey bestie, I have to do this. Can you just call me tomorrow and make sure it's done? That's helpful. That's helpful for me.
Thank you, Maya. Hannah, what about you? What's a challenge you've encountered with research?
I think one of the biggest challenges that I've encountered with my research is just not being taken seriously. And I suspect it is not to put on a tinfoil hat here, but like systematic bias and oppression is real. So I wrote in my notes that there's a high probability that, if you're part of any marginalized group, that somebody has very confidently dismissed something that you're saying that isn't wrong. But for some reason, because of who it comes from, it wasn't here, but it was at another institution of learning, I was told that my powerfully and intensely feminine appearance was going to be a problem for me. And I can't do anything about that. But like, what am I? Okay, so wear a potato bag and disappear. Cool, thank you. I still have to pay my bills. Like, that was not helpful to me in any capacity. So it very much stood in the way of my research, because it's like, if you sit down and like put your fingers on the keyboard and the first thing you think to yourself is, no one's ever going to take you seriously, where's the incentive to do anything? And so I think for me, it was a matter of finding people who did take me seriously. And it was an incredible research opportunity for me, because then I got to fall down several rabbit holes of people who were researching what I wanted to research. And then I found out people like Audre Lorde and Roxane Gay were doing things that I was interested in. And those are people that are incredibly well respected. So I think muddying the waters of certain people's opinions with certain other people's opinions, and being a good researcher and kind of going with not what confirms your bias already, but just finding, just getting more acquainted with what people are researching and engaging with the literature, right? I think that that's something that a lot of humanities folks get told a lot, is to engage with the literature. That was a very powerful motivator for me to engage with the literature. And it also helped me remember, just throughout all the conceptual research that I did, that there is no view from nowhere. And it doesn't matter how much authority somebody has, there's still a person that has a birthday and they still have been here for, I'm going to confidently say, less than 100 years. Anybody who says anything to you has been here for less than 100 years. And they are located in time and space and history, and they have a context, and they are a person. So it doesn't matter how confidently somebody says something as though it is just the fact of the matter, because there is no fact of the matter. Not really. And I think remembering that has been a lifesaver for me in a lot of ways, especially being a woman in philosophy, which is incredibly male dominated. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal stories. I think a lot of the things that you've each experienced and shared with us thus far on all the topics are things that other students are experiencing as well. So it's definitely good to hear how some of current graduate students here at UH Manoa are approaching these challenges. I just want to add, I know another significant challenge that graduate students run into is funding when it comes to their research. Just wanted to share a couple of resources that if that is an area that you're running into. Two websites you can start off with are our graduate division website. We have a financial support webpage, and then also GSO, which I'm sure Logan could share more about if you're interested in hearing, because they have grants and awards and merit awards as well. So definitely check their website out as well. But I do want to turn to the Padlet for at least one last time to see what students are saying or asking about graduate student research. Logan, what's something that you see being posted that you'd like to speak to?
I picked up on the particular comment that talked about imposter syndrome and research. And like I mentioned, I'm in the tropical medicine department, which is biomedical sciences based. However, my undergraduate degree is in sports science and kinesiology. So massive transition and imposter syndrome. Walking through that, I didn't even know it existed until graduate school. And I think that can, in tying along with the other comment, feeling like you have nothing original to contribute to the field. I think if you find something that you are interested in and that you want to work on and that you want to discover, then that should be it. You don't have to always have a Nobel Prize winning topic or thesis or idea. Research is research, and research is for discovery, for finding out things that we don't know already. And so I think grounding yourself in the fact that you are contributing something, and someone out there will probably use your work in the near future, who knows how long and how far, but you're contributing to the gain of human knowledge. And I think realizing that it can be really impactful and really important when you're struggling with things like graduate student research.
Thank you, Logan. Yes, imposter syndrome is huge. Maya, is there something that you're seeing on the Padlet that really stands out to you that you want to speak to?
Those two same comments are the ones that I latched onto. I think because, I have experienced a lot of imposter syndrome. Like Logan, I did not major. So I didn't major in economics in my, can you all still hear me? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Things froze, so I wasn't sure. Sorry. So I actually majored in Spanish in undergrad, and I did a minor in physics. And I think there was one part of it, one of the comments that said, how do I know I'm in the right program? And I feel like I've gone through a lot of switching and knowing that you can alter your trajectory, and so I went into undergrad thinking I was going to be an engineer, and I came out a Spanish major who was like, I need to do economics, because I want to do something more socially grounded. And then I thought coming into graduate school, I was going to do environmental economics. And now I'm looking at the economics of health and crime. So, there's large switches that can happen. And also knowing that these shifts are totally normal. That, like those unexpected results you may get, you may go along thinking, oh, this is what I want to do. And then you discover, it's part of, like what Logan said, research is part of it is discovery. You discover a new topic. You come across an article, of some recent thing or not recent thing. You're like, wow, this just totally resonates with me. I have to change my topic. And I mean, that's I've lived through that. And it's okay to make those switches. So also, I recently decided to take an extra year before going on the job market and graduation. And for me, that was very hard because I had a very set timeline in my brain. And, it was hard for me to not feel like I had failed, but it's really, I wanted to be able to make my research as good as it could be and to give myself the best opportunity on the job market. And I think that's just another example of how you can come in with a vision, but you need to remember that it can't be set in stone, because who knows if that one little twist or turn is going to lead you to your true passion. And to just always, I think you mentioned it earlier about something Hannah had said, but being open to these new experiences and being open to learning.
Yeah, I definitely think a central message we're hearing is flexibility, and that's something we're all becoming a little bit more adept at over the past 2 years. Hannah, would you like to close out some comments on the Padlet?
Sure. There was one that I saw about changing priorities, and I just want to echo that because my priorities have changed a lot in the last 4 years. I have a dad, but he just had a real wild health roller coaster, and priorities change. People get married, people get divorced, people have kids. People no longer have kids. People who have kids that like graduate from high school, now they're all going to college together. Like, priorities change when you are in graduate school. And that is something that I think happens to a lot of people, but we don't necessarily want to talk about it because it's stressful, or because depending on how competitive the program is, somebody might take like an uncharitable view of like, oh, well, they're going to drop out here soon anyway, because like they just got married and that's stressful, and so on and so forth. But I wrote that there is likely a way to approach one's priorities differently. And the biggest tip that I have is to talk to someone you trust in your field about what's happening. Because if you're just kind of not really feeling it right now, if you just like really do not want to write your dissertation because you are so much more invested in another area of your life, maybe that's a good way to get some distance on your dissertation and like do other parts of it that you might not want to do otherwise. Right? Like if you need to take a step back and just do more skeletal planning, or if you just want to compile more resources and then maybe go over them later, there is likely a way to configure whatever is going on into what you're doing. If again, to, bring it full circle, to kind of remain open and flexible. Because if we put a man on the moon, then we can probably figure out how to help each other as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to everyone that, we've shared a lot of our stories, and basically we're all going through this graduate experience together. And I'm going to put my email in the chat here. And if you would like to talk to somebody who, if any of my stories resonated with you, and you want to talk to somebody who's, sometimes somebody who's outside your department can give a little bit of perspective. I do actually answer people who who reach out and email me, and as I've said, I feel like I don't see people. I would love to meet you for coffee or anything else. So please do feel free to email me with any questions.
Thank you for putting yourself out there, Maya, and to all our panelists. But before we close, because this has been such an excellent discussion, I just wanted to ask each of our panelists to share a 1-minute closing thought. So Maya, what would be your 1-minute closing thought for today?
I think it would be something that I wish that I could tell my past self, is just that you are not alone in this, that there are others going through feeling this, imposter syndrome, feeling like there's more that they're procrastinating more, and that there is a support network here. And there are like getting emotional about this, because it's really been a challenge for me, especially during COVID. And yeah, that's why I put my email out there, is that, if you need somebody to talk to, there are people you can talk to, and we want you to succeed.
Thank you. Logan, what's your closing thought?
I think that I would just say that graduate school can be very enjoyable. And if you just take a moment to think about the fact that you are pursuing higher education, and that you are in many aspects on the cusp of current research and ideals, like that's a really cool place that you get to be at. And I know that there is stress associated with it, loss of sleep, changing priorities, everything that comes with it. But to take a step back and congratulate yourself that you are pursuing more, and that you are contributing more. And I think that's really cool. I think we don't do that enough, and pat ourselves on the back. I'm like, oh yeah, this is a really cool thing that we get to participate in.
Very good point. Hannah, what's your final thought for today?
I think my final thought is that I got into philosophy for the wrong reasons when I was 18, and I'm 31 now, so it's been a minute. But I got into this because I thought that I was going to be able to solve the human condition. It's like, oh, clearly I just don't know enough, right? Like, I just don't know what that answer is. And in the last what feels like 1,000 years of me being in school, I've noticed through all the things that I've learned and all the people that I've met, that there are certain problems that are not solvable, because that's just not it's not a problem. Right? Being a human being is not a problem that we have to solve. And it is not a condition that we need to figure out so you just never have to worry about it again, right? Like, there are certain things that are just part of being a person. And I think that I wouldn't have figured that out had I not started asking myself these questions in the first place. So if you're there along with me, you're like, I don't know if this is a bug or a feature. It's probably a feature that's not very convenient. So if that's where you are as well, you're not alone. And that, yeah, like there's just no way to solve the human condition. That's not a thing you need to worry about. You're not bad at being a person. You're just a person.
Yeah, and something Hannah and I were talking about that goes along with that is just remember to be kind to yourself. That's part of being human. We have to be forgiving and kind to ourselves as well. Well, thank you so much to our panelists, Logan Dean, Hannah Klein, and Maya Ward from GSO for sitting on our panel today. And thank you so much to our attendees as well for being part of our discussion. Mahalo for joining us today, and this concludes our session.